the King, all glorious above, and gratefully sing His wonderful love. Our shield and defender, the Ancient of Days, pavilioned in splendor and girded with praise. Frail children of dust and feeble as frail, in Thee do we trust, nor find Thee to fail. Thy mercies how tender, how firm to the end. Our Maker, Defender, Redeemer, and friend. We're going to be talking this morning about what are called royal songs. That's why we sing "O Worship the King," because I wanted to do a king song. There was another one I kind of wanted to do, but we settled on this. Before we do it, as we always do, review. What have we learned so far about the Psalms? Give us anything. What's that? Parallelism. Parallelism, which, how did we define that? Do you remember? Rhyming of thought. Rhyming thoughts instead of rhyming words. You said one? Okay, that's a type of parallelism. It's quite antithetical. How are they? Do you remember? Opposite. Contradicts. One line says this, the other line says the opposite. Okay? Emblematic. As the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you. It's a symbol. It emblemizes what's going on. Okay? Those are our types of parallelism. Anything else that we've learned? Yes. Psalm 22. Psalm 22, Jesus quoted that from the cross. We talked about it from the idea that this was Jesus' songbook. So he's on the cross. And if you read Psalm 22, what do we see? It's a picture of what's happening at the cross. Okay, we talked about different types of psalms. Okay? Psalms of ascent were one type. That was the idea of going up. As they went up to Jerusalem, they sang these songs. And that's 120 through 134. They also had songs they sang at Passover. Do you remember which songs they sang at Passover? About 113 to 118. Because that idea of when Jesus, that last night before he's betrayed, it says they sung a hymn and went to the Mount of Olives. We pretty much know that they ended up with Psalm 118. Because the Jews have been doing this for millennia, right? They've been celebrating Passover since before Christianity came along, right? For 1,000 years before Christianity came along, they did Passover. And they sang songs. They had songs they sang at different times, okay? So, what we're looking at today are songs they sang at a certain time. And we're going to call them royal songs. Well, let's not do that. There's more to review. Other things we've talked about. What did we talk about last week? Do you remember? I'm going to write a big word up there. Imprecatory psalms. Do you remember what imprecatory psalms were? It was really angry, cursing, right? God, I want his wife to be a widow and his children to be fatherless, right? That line, God, wipe his name out of the book of life. I had a guy talking, said that talking about learning to pray for your enemies. This is especially they're going to pray for his mother-in-law that she would go to heaven. You could go ahead and take her today. But that's a starting point, right? That's the idea, is we're learning to pray for somebody. And so again, imprecatory psalms, which were, again, a difficult psalm. And we talked about teaching psalms, right? Teaching psalms, wisdom psalms, and we talked about that some of them they're what are called acrostics. You remember what an acrostic is? All the Hebrew letters, that they go in order, right? That they would start off with that first letter that's an aleph, and then the bet, which is where we get our word alphabet. Which psalm can you easily find and remember always as an acrostic? It's a psalm that you already know for something else. Psalm 119. When I grew up, Psalm 119, I knew it for one thing. It's the longest book in the Bible. Go ahead and open it up and look at Psalm 119. Because when you're looking for short chapters and short memory verses, when you have to do those type things, that's when you're like, ooh, I'm never gonna try to memorize that one. But ironically, it was written to be memorized. All right, Psalm 119. And at the very beginning of Psalm 119, what do you see? Aleph, right? And those first 8 verses all begin with that letter. And you get to before verse 9, you look and you see what? Beth, okay? That's the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And those all next 8 verses all begin with that letter, right? So if you want to learn the Hebrew alphabet, there it is in Psalm 119. Every 8 verses, you'll see the next letter. So again, the idea of those were teaching psalms, and we talked about the idea that is what we part of what we do with singing is that it's not all to God. We haven't really talked about praise songs yet. We've talked about songs that we sing to each other, which again is a New Testament concept. Ephesians 5, 18, 19, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to yourselves in hymns and songs and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your hearts to the Lord. Whew. Y'all know that song? Y'all know that song? Be filled with the Spirit. Oh, man, that's one we should learn. Okay? But that's the idea of it, is we speak to one another. We encourage one another with songs, hymns, and spiritual songs. Okay? So that's kind of where we are. That's kind of review. And we talked about what's going to be on the final, right? You remember what's going to be on the final? No? The thing that was going to be on the final. Goodness gracious. Yeah. On the final, there's only one thing you have to know. That God's left or God's right. Right? In the end, God's going to divide us up, sheep and the goats. Right? The goats on the right, sheep on the left. Is that on God's right and left, or is that on our right and left as we're looking at Him? That's really the only question you need to know. That's the only question that you need to know from the final. Okay? Do you remember that? Right, we just did that in passing. What's that? I told you just look for Chuck. That's what we're doing. And we talked, can I stray just a little second? Because that made me think that. Do you know when the final is going to be? Exactly. Nobody knows. That's the answer to that one. You look at that. Let's do that real quick. Matthew 24. And then I promise you we'll get into royal songs. But that's kind of, it's one of the things I kind of like to toss out there and make people think about and remember. Matthew 24 is a passage that is used by people over and over and over again to talk about the end of the world, end times, right? I want you to see something about it. Starting in verse 1, Jesus comes out of the temple and he's going away with his disciples, and they came to a point, his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him and said to him, "Do you not see these things here? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another which will not be torn down." And he was sitting on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Okay? One of the things I want you to notice here, how many questions does Jesus ask them? Look at it. How many questions does he ask? How many? Look at how many he asked. Well, no, look at it. When will these things happen? Comma. What will be the sign of your coming? Comma. And of the end of the age. How many questions were there? 3, okay? So Jesus is going to answer 3 questions. And he starts off Matthew 24. And we'll talk about see to it that that no one misleads you, right? They're going to do all these things. They're all going to happen. And he's answering questions. And he talks about, look down at verse 19, those days, the things that are going to happen in those days. He keeps on talking about what's going to happen. Verse 29, those days, right? The Son of Man appearing. And the idea of God visiting was a judgment of God. And then finally gets down, I grab this, verse 34. Verse 34, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, and my words will not pass away. Now he changes, no longer those days, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Okay? You see that? He's answered those days. That day, no one knows. So when is the temple going to be destroyed? When are you going to bring judgment? When are you going to visit? Okay? And then, when's the end of the world? So he answers 3 questions. The best way for me to help you grab this is to look at Luke's parallel. Okay? Luke 21. Starting in verse 5. While some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he said, as for these things which you're looking at, the days will come in which they will not be left one stone upon another, which will not be torn down. They questioned him, and watch this, Teacher, when therefore will these things happen? What will be the sign when these things are about to take place? How many questions does he ask them? What do they not ask him? They asked him 2 questions. When is this going to happen? And what's going to be the sign when these things are going to take place? What's he not asked them about that was asked in Matthew 24? The end of the age. That question's not there, is it? So anything you read in Luke 21, Jesus does something strange. He answers the questions they asked. Okay? So I say all this because what happens is you'll see things, and end time stuff is huge. Okay? If you want to sell a book about Christianity, you write about the end of the world. All right? Because people are fascinated with it. They want to know about the end of the world. And you can sell lots and lots of books talking about the end times. And a lot of what they'll do is they'll take things from Matthew 24, where Jesus is answering the first 2 questions, and apply them to the 3rd question, when's the end of the world? What I would tell you to do is you can always go to Luke 21, that parallel passage. Anything found in Luke 21 is about the two questions that Jesus answered, right? When is this going to happen, right? What are going to be the signs when this is going to happen? Not about the end of the world. So if I read something in Luke 21, what is it not talking about? The end of the world, right? It's not talking about the end of the world. So again, if you see something that people are talking about from Matthew 24 and applying it to the end of the world, and you see it in Luke 21, what's not about the end of the world? Okay? So the answer to the question is, when is the final? Nobody knows. You know we're not taking a test. Y'all do know that, right? I keep talking about that, but we're not taking a test over this. All right. I'm sorry. What's that? It does. It's every time I've said it, people kind of perked. I kind of look out of the corner of my eye to see who perks up. Okay. Yes. All right. Royal Psalms. Royal Psalms basically are, they call them royal psalms, enthronement psalms, kingly psalms. And the idea is this: one of the things that happens in Judaism that doesn't happen with us in the way it happens with them is they get a new king every now and then. We get a new president. When we get a new president, you know what they do? They throw a big, huge party. They throw lots of big, huge parties, right? That's what happens when we have a new president. Guess what the Jews did when they got a new king? Big, huge party, right? Big, huge party. And their parties, and ours more so, used to be very religious. Their parties are religious because in their mind's eye, the king is a representative of God, right? We don't have kings anymore, and we don't think possibly of our politicians as being representatives of God. Well, they did. All right? We use this, we talk about this idea, and I've told you this, the word Christ, right? I thought for the first over a decade of my Christian life that Christ was Jesus' last name, right? I thought that he was the son of Mary and Joseph Christ. That's not the idea. Christ it just means Messiah, and is the Hebrew word, but what it means is anointed. Anointed. The anointed kings. He is somebody that's going to be king. That's the idea. That's the huge thing that's going on. He's going to be king. When we read the Gospel of Matthew, one of the things you see in the Gospel of Matthew is written predominantly to Jews. He talks about the idea that Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David. That's how he starts it off. Because the Jews are all looking for this king. They're looking for this. They've been preparing and thinking about and waiting for a special king. They've always had kings. But there's a king that they're waiting for. They're waiting for this Christ. They're waiting for this Messiah. Every time a new king comes, the hope is maybe this is the guy. Maybe this is the guy. And so what we see in some ways, we'll just look at them. Let's look at a few. Let's start with Psalm 2. So remember, they're anointing a king and they're singing songs. When we have a new president, they play songs, right? Big bands get up there and they play songs that are very patriotic and all that stuff. Psalm 2. And we'll watch for the parallelism. Ready? Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples devising a vain thing? Can you see that? There's your first parallelism. Line 1, line 2 repeats that thought. The kings of the earth take their stand. The rulers take counsel together. There again, you see it, right? You got one line. The second line's repeating that thought. It's a rhyming of thought. That's Hebrew poetry. That's what it looks like. Against the Lord and against his anointed. All right? Let me ask you if you remember this one. It says against the Lord. You know anything odd about the word Lord there? It's all capitalized. When we read the word Lord in the Old Testament, it's all capitalized. What does that mean? What's that? That's God's divine name. The Jews won't say it. They will not say it, so they say the word Lord. And we distinguish it in the English Bibles. They give it to us by making all those letters capitalized. We'll say Jehovah or Yahweh. Again, we don't know. All right. The reason we don't know, Hebrew, the original Hebrew, it's all just consonants. They didn't write the vowels. There are no vowels. They're all consonants. Which again, if you need to do that sometimes. It's all consonants, and I actually did this for one of the classes, and I didn't show it to you. You write a sentence out and write it out without the vowels. Don't put any spaces in between it. And what you'll find is you can read it. And that's what they did. Okay? Later, a group of priests came in, so let's add the vowels so it's easier to read for people. And it is. But again, because of that, and because they had not said God's name for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, nobody knew how to say it. They didn't want to take God. These are people who are serious about not taking God's name in vain. All right, they just wouldn't say it. And so to this day, we don't know. I'll give you one more. This is one more free thing, though. Okay. This is what God's name looks like in Hebrew. That is a Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. Okay? And we read and we know the story about the burning bush. Remember the story of the burning bush? And Moses says to the voice in the burning bush, who am I going to say sent me? Who sent me? And the answer is, I am. And sometimes your version might say, I am that I am, which is very interesting because of that word. In just about every language that is out there, the verb to be is irregular. You know what I mean by irregular? I got some nods. I'll write a word down. Profane. I saw that in reading here. This is the verb profane. What? I profane, you profane, he, she, it profanes, right? If I did it in the past tense, what would I do? Okay? That's what you do to a regular verb, right? But if I see something in the past tense, what do I not do? I don't seed it. Okay? That would be that would, unless I wanted it to really grow. Okay? So that verb is irregular. All right? The verb to be is irregular in just about every language you can come to. All right? Hebrew is very different from our language, English, and a lot of Western languages. Hebrew is an Eastern language. Remember, Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees, right? Right? He's more kind of Iranian, right? He's an Easterner. They have more Eastern thought. In English, we think past tense, present tense, future tense. That's just how we think. That's how our language is designed. The Hebrew language does complete action and incomplete action. We look at our actions in time. They look at, are they complete? Are they ongoing? Are they future? And they have one tense, the hit pile, and it is causative. Pretend I know how to write causative. It's causative. It means he caused profanity. He caused vision. This word, if the word to be was not irregular in Hebrew, is what the causative tense would look like, which means the one who causes to be. That's what it would look like. The one who causes to be. So when he says I am, when we say I am, what are we talking about? Past tense? Yeah, present. It's all that, right? So it's continuous. But with God, it's not just that, but he caused all the being from here to here. He's not just the being, he's the cause of all the being. Okay? Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Breathing, which gives us the idea of, again, the word spirit. The word spirit, it's breath, right? The word spirit, yeah. Yes. And we talk about, okay, the Holy Spirit. Here's our word spirit in Greek, pneuma. Okay. Some of you have tools that involve pneuma. They are pneumatic, which means they are air tools, breath. That's why you see sometimes there are passages in John where it talks about nobody knows, and it compares the Spirit to wind. And you can't tell in the Greek where you're supposed to say Spirit, where you're supposed to say wind. Because it's the same. It's kind of fun. That's all. I've gotten off track. That's okay. We still got plenty of time. Okay, so again, Royal Psalm. We looked about the kings taking against God's anointed, his Christ. Let's tear their fetters apart, cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Notice anything there? Look at the word Lord. What do you notice about it? It's lowercase. So it's not God's divine name. It's somebody else who's scoffing, not Jehovah. How about that? He will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury. But as for me, I've installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I've begotten you. This is a kingly psalm, right? Every time they have a king, this is a song they're going to sing. Today I've begotten you. Ask of me, I will give you the nations as your inheritance and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You'll shatter them like earthenware. Now, therefore, O king, show discernment. Take warning, O judge of the earth. Worship the Lord with reverence. Rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry and you perish in the way, where his wrath may be soon kindled. How blessed are all those who take refuge in him. So again, there's kings, and then there's the king that's to come, and God says of him, you are my son, right? You are my son. Okay, let's look at another one. Psalm 78. I'll give you a whole list of them you can look at later. But I'm sorry, I said 78. I meant 72. 72. A Psalm of Solomon. Again, in Hebrew, one of the things there's a letter, the Lamed, which means two or four of. And you don't know the answer of it unless you really know the context. In English, I hit Mary. Okay? I hit Mary. Okay? In this sentence, I'm in trouble. Right? Because Mary is what's called a direct object. But if I do this, everything's different. Right? I hit Mary the ball. And it's understood that I hit the ball to Mary. It's called indirect object, all right? In the Hebrew, when we look at these things where it says a psalm of Solomon, to or for of Solomon, okay? It means Solomon could have written it. It also means it could be written about Solomon. When we read it, I think we're going to see it kind of leans towards the second of the two, all right? Here you go. Give the king your judgments, O God, and your righteousness to the king's son. Think about that from the terms of what we just said, right? Who was Solomon's dad? David. All right. So, may he judge your people with righteousness and your afflicted with justice. Let the mountains bring peace to the people and the hills in righteousness. May he vindicate the afflicted of the people, save the children of the needy, and crush the oppressor. Let them fear you while the sun endures, as long as the moon throughout all generations. May he come down like rain upon the mown grass, like showers that water the earth. In his days may the righteous flourish, and the abundance of peace till the moon is no more. May he rule from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. Let the nomads of the desert bow before him, and his enemies lick the dust. Let the kings of Tarshish and the islands bring presents. The king of Sheba and Seba offer gifts. And let all kings bow down before him and nations serve him. So again, you can see writing about, here's the new king. We're singing the song about the new king. He will deliver the needy when he cries for help, the afflicted also, and him who has no helper. He will have compassion on the poor and needy, and the lives of the needy he will save. He will rescue their life from oppression and violence, and their blood will be precious in his sight. So may he live, and may the gold of Sheba be given to him. Let them pray for him continually. Let them bless him all day long. May there abundance of grain in the earth on top of the mountains. Its fruit will wave like the cedars of Lebanon. May those from the city flourish like vegetation of the earth. May his name endure forever. May his name increase as long as the sun shines. And let men bless themselves by him. Let all nations call him blessed. Blessed be the Lord God, the God of Israel, who alone works wonders. And blessed be his glorious name forever. And may the whole earth be filled with his glory. Amen and amen. And in verse 20, the prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended. Which kind of makes it sound like David wrote this about Solomon. And that they kept singing it about every king. Because they were wanting a king who did all these things. That delivered the needy, that crushed the oppressors, that the whole earth gave glory and praise to. That's what they were looking for. That's what they've been waiting for all along. Okay? Doing one more here. Psalm 110. Psalm 110. The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool at your feet. Does that sound familiar? That's from the New Testament. All right? Let's look at that, Matthew 22. This psalm is the most quoted psalm in the New Testament. When you're looking at the New Testament and things that are said, this is the one that jumps out over and over and over. Matthew 22. I think that's around. There we go. All right, so they've been questioning Jesus. All right. So the Pharisees asked Jesus a question. Were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question, verse 41. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question. What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he? Righty? We talked about Christ. It means anointed. Who is it? Whose son is the anointed? They said to him, the Son of David. He said to them, then how does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies beneath your feet. Okay? So they know, all right? The Jews know this is one of these kingly songs. We're writing about this king to come. Whose son? Whose son is the Christ? David? David doesn't call him son. He calls him master, Lord. You're my boss. All right? How many of you got sons? How often do you call them, hey, you're my boss? Okay, the Jews were the same way. So that's the question that Jesus is answering the Pharisees. How does David say the Lord, all capital letters, how does the divine God of the universe call him? The Lord said to my, meaning David's, Lord. David wrote that in the Spirit. David is saying, this king that's to come is not my son. You've been talking about him as my son, being of my seed. David says, he's my boss. Okay? Back to Psalm 110. All right? The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. I told you that's the most quoted. That's also find the last part of that verse in Acts 2. The idea of your enemies a footstool for your feet. Verse 2, the Lord, again the divine name of God, will stretch forth your strong scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people will volunteer freely in the day of your power, in holy array from the womb of the dawn. Your youth are to you as the dew. And here's another verse that's quoted quite a bit in the New Testament. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Okay. The Jews get new kings and they sing a song, and they're singing this song to the new king, and they come to you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. How many of the kings of the Jews were priests? Zero. None of them. All right? They were all from the tribe of Judah. Right? They all came from the lineage of David. David was from Judah. The priests come from where? Levi. There's a different family. You can't be a priest and be the king. Can't do it. Can't happen. But every time they get a new king, what do? They sing this song. Which of those kings ever becomes a priest? None of them. None of them. They're singing about some king that's going to come. All right? And that's what we find out in the book of Hebrews. All right? The book of Hebrews is a great, fun book. All right? If I'm going to write the theme to the word of the book of Hebrews, I do it in one word, and it is this. Better. Better. That is the theme of that whole book. He's writing to the Jews, and what he's saying is, what you have now in Jesus is better than anything you've ever had. He tells them at the very beginning, you got messages in the past from angels, not anymore. Now you get messages from the Son. All right? You had Moses who told you what to do. You got somebody better than Moses. You had priests. All right? Well, now you got another priest. But it's not like these priests that you had, because all these Levites, you know what happens to all the Levites? They died. They all died. But this priest you got lives forever. He's in the order of Melchizedek. When did Melchizedek die? We don't know. Now, Jews do this. They don't think like we do. But one thing he talks about, it says, he has no mother and father. It just means they didn't mention. It doesn't mean he didn't have a mother and father. But because he's not mentioned, it's kind of like the idea that the order of Melchizedek goes on forever because you never hear about him dying. We're pretty sure he died. Okay? But again, that's Jews and the way they're using, it's not an analogy. It's a symbolism of type. Paul uses the same thing in Galatians when he talks about Hagar, right? He talks about Hagar, and he talks about the two mountains that the law came off of, and they symbolize things to come. So Jesus, he says, again, you've got this king you've been singing about forever, that he's going to be a priest. You finally got it. You finally get one. And that's where you see this. This is quoted in the book of Hebrews. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And the idea of that is that Melchizedek is greater than Levi. All right? Let's back this one up. All right? Levi is the son of not the son, great-grandson of Abraham, right? So again, those who come after us, we don't call them our boss. We don't call them our betters. That's been cultural from long, long, long time ago, right? So Levi is lesser than Abraham. But Abraham, as he's coming back across Salem, he runs across Melchizedek, and he offers Melchizedek 10%, right? I'm going to give you a reward. I'm going to give you, basically, I'm going to pay homage to you because you're a priest. Abraham never gave homage to Levi, but he did to Melchizedek at Salem. Okay? At Salem, he gave him, so he's a greater priest. He's a greater priest than what you have in Levites. That's part of what's said back in Hebrews. All right? I got to finish up. The Lord is at your right hand. He will shatter kings in the day of his wrath. He will judge among the nations. He will fill them with corpses. He will shatter the chief man over a broad country and will drink the brook by the wayside. Therefore, he will lift up his head. The idea of the biggest thing I kind of want you to grab from this is there are whole groups of Psalms that are written about kings that are to come, or the king that is going to be throned, but everything eventually points to Jesus. And to me, if I were to talk about why I am convinced the story that we have in our Bibles is because David and these men wrote these Psalms 1,000 to 600 years before Jesus showed up, and the things that they said happened. They happened. And that's amazing. You go back and read that Psalm 22 again, where Jesus is on the cross. You pay attention to that psalm and realize that was written 1,000 years before Jesus showed up. And for all those things to have taken place, it's phenomenal. And that's the thing about with these psalms. They're all pushing and hoping for this one king to come that's going to take care of everything and make everything right in the end. And that's the promise of God. That's the promise of these songs that they've been singing together. One day, God's going to give us a king, and everything's going to be okay. Which is good, because for them, we have a lot of freedoms that we take for granted. Right? They didn't have all that. They weren't guaranteed those things. If they wanted justice, if they wanted riches, they had to go to the king to get all that. And a good king took care of the needy, took care of all those things. And so that's the promise that is to come with Jesus. He's taking care of everything. And for us, we see him here, but there's also that future that is to come. That very last, I'm going to take care of everything and make it all right. All right? We'll pick up with another type psalm next week. I'm sorry I went over.